All right, so in the second part of the slipped classroom, we're going to be looking at West Africa. So these kingdoms in West Africa were pretty fantastic, and they all lie along the Niger River here. So the Niger River, you can follow it from the coast and up into basically this region called the Sahel, and then it makes which means coast in Swahili, and then there's this big bend in the river. And right along that bend is the city of Timbuktu. So Timbuktu is right here. It was the capital for the Mali Empire, and I believe the Ghana Empire as well, but nope, I'm wrong. So it was a center of learning, and we're going to learn about that in just a second. So how did these states become centralized in Western Africa? Well, it has a lot to do with the rise of a certain animal, the camel. As Berbers and Arabs learned to use the camel to move across the Sahara Desert in caravans, they were able to move a lot more goods between the Arab coast in North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. This is because camels are specially adapted to the type of heat and the other aspects of the harsh environment like the Sahara, such as moving sands. Their feet have special huge pads on them. Their eyes have extremely long eyelashes to keep the sand out of their eyes. Their fur is specifically designed to help them with heat. Camels are pretty much like where it's at. So the camel is very important to this situation here. So the Ghana, Mali, and then Songhai had one humongous export product, and that export product was gold. And these products feathers were kind of secondary, used for ceremonial purposes, usually coming from rainforest birds down here, and then ivory, obviously, from elephants. Those things were also traded, but for the most part, it was gold that people wanted. And then they were importing from the Dar al Islam salt from the coast to help them in the preservation of food, and then crops. So some of the crops that were imported, and you might remember this from the Indian Ocean Basin lesson in class. So we had salt for food preservation, and then we had crops such as citrus and sugar and bananas that made headway the uh, in the West African kingdoms. Ghana is the small kingdom here that was substantial from the 5th to the 12th century. And then Mali is the larger kingdom here with Timbuktu right on the edge of it. Okay. The Songhai Empire closes out this time period, but we'll talk about them in the next time period because they are also around then. Their capital was Timbuktu. Timbuktu was a religious center, first of all, for Islam. And it was also there was a university there. So there was also a center of learning. There is a Minnesota connection here. Right now, you can see in the previous slide, Timbuktu is in the interior, and this is also where Boko Haram has been really active, and they have actually destroyed or tried to destroy many Islamic texts. And St. John's University has a partnership with some of the or St. John's College. I can't remember if it's college or university, but they have a partnership with some of the Islamic schools there, and they are bringing out documents that would have been destroyed and preserving them by scanning them. I mean, this is like a huge, long process. They're preserving thousands of pages, and it's really important work. So this right here is a mud mosque, and we'll probably see this in class, but if we don't, it's a combination of traditional architecture and using mud, which is a material they had a lot of, but not just mud, but also straw. Not a lot of timbers. This is a building that can be reproduced many, many times. Um, and this is Islamic mosque concept, so we'll learn about that in class. Timbuktu is also a trade center, as I mentioned earlier, with Muslim traders coming in from the north and then trading with Africans in Timbuktu. And then it was the political capital of Mali. So here's a great picture of Timbuktu at the time period, or rendering of Timbuktu at the time period. Okay, so I mentioned that Islam was really important here, and that conversion in West Africa started with leaders. And leaders saw converting to Islam as a piece of leverage, basically. It gave them a common relationship with the people they wanted to trade with, and this led to positive relations. So basically, by converting to Islam, they were able to have more trade and more wealth. Sundiata, who was an early king in Mali, kind of started this conversion. Over here, these are griots, or sacred storytellers, who passed down the epic of Sundiata. Sundiata is also known as the Lion King, and there are elements of Disney's The Lion King that definitely match Sundiata's story. Mansa Musa is another fascinating king from Mali a little bit later. When he went on his Hajj, to to um, to Mecca, he basically displayed how wealthy Mali was, and he brought with him on this Hajj 60,000 soldiers, 12,000 slaves, and 80 camels. Each of those camels carried 50 to 300 pounds of gold, and and he brought so much gold with him and handed it out in so much in Egypt that he basically created runaway inflation. He brought in so much gold that he made gold worth less. Islam was very much incorporated into existing practices. So there was a lot of African traditions that continue to be prevalent. And you can really see this in Ibn Battuta's writing. Obviously, he's not too pleased with how the Africans are implementing Islam in their country, even though he says, "Look, these guys, they're devout, but they're just not practicing things the same way as we would." So here's Mansa Musa, and you can see him holding his wonderful. Oops, that arrow is going to be going the opposite way, right? So there's Mansa Musa with his gold, and then this is the entire map that this is from. So here's Mansa Musa here. This is depicting his caravan, the mosques that he creates all over the place. Yes. So the next thing we're going to do is to look at the Swahili city-states, particularly Zimbabwe's role, or excuse me, not Zimbabwe's role. Yeah, Great Zimbabwe's role. And then we'll look at the Zand Revolt, and that'll be the end of the PowerPoint.